Hi, I'm Brandon Poe, founder of Poe Group Advisors and creator of the Accounting Practice Academy. You are listening to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast, where we talk about stuff in the accounting world. If you're looking to buy or sell a practice, we are the premier accounting practice intermediary firm in the industry. Check us out at pogroupadvisors.com. If you're a firm owner looking to build a more profitable practice while actually reducing owner hours, sign up for our practice management workshop, which only runs a few times per year. Learn more at accountingpracticeacademy.com. Welcome to Accountant's Flight Plan podcast. I have a wonderful guest today, Liz Mason, and you're going to love this chat today, I know, because she's a serial entrepreneur, CEO and founder of Highrock Accounting. She speaks on a national stage. She's been on a lot of podcasts. She writes frequently, serves as Xero National Ambassador, and she's creative, passionate, and innovative. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So I first met Liz in Los Angeles at the Xero Roadshow last year. And if you don't know what Xero is, then we need to correct that. Xero is a, I guess, QuickBooks competitor is probably the best way to describe them. They were
Cloud-based accounting tool.
Born in the cloud, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And we shared the stage for a little bit and got to know each other, hung out a little bit, had a great time. So welcome to the podcast. And just if you would share some background with our listeners, how did you choose accounting and how did you come to start Highrock Accounting?
So those are two very different questions, but I'd be happy to elaborate on both. I chose accounting actually not by choice, which is a very weird way to say that. But when I was a kid, my dad is actually an accounting professor, and he was going through his PhD program, and he had a class that wasn't doing so well on his tests, and he believed, he was a bad teacher. So he started learning, okay, how do I teach better? How do I get these kids engaged and learning accounting? And in that process, I was a middle school student that was a little rebellious and struggled to follow the rules and was constantly getting grounded. So he thought it would be fun to tell me the way to get ungrounded was to learn financial accounting and managerial accounting and basic tax and all the undergrad classes that he was teaching while he was a PhD student. And turns out if you start studying for accounting when you're 11, it makes it a little easier when you get to college. So I, started my accounting career, I would say, at a very early age. I learned a lot from my dad. I would get a B or better to get ungrounded, which, was probably every other month. I did something because I'm me. Yeah, so by the time college came around, it was very easy. So I decided to pursue that. And I also, didn't love the job prospects of some of the other degrees out there. And I loved the idea that with accounting, you could be at client sites. You could learn about how these businesses were operating and really see the inside of how they worked and what made them run. And, they say the accounting is the financial lifeblood of the business world. And so I thought it was fascinating to learn that and be able to explore that in my career. And then how I started Highrock was I did the whole I'm going to go work for a big firm, and I did that. I started at 19, clearly because I had already studied all the accounting classes. I was able to get my degree quickly. So I graduated early, and I pursued my CPA license and did the big firm auditor, big firm tax accountant, big firm consultant. I did all of it. And then I decided that it was a little boring. And I thought I could start a company to utilize the technology that these bigger firms were ignoring and change the business model. Because I also felt like the billable hour was just not sustainable for long term, especially as technology gets better and better at efficiency. So I pivoted to start Highrock about 10 years ago and had this kind of idea that I could use everything cloud-based, everything efficient, integrated systems that were designed and built specifically for clients' workflows and considering their operations and accounting, and partner deeply with them with a monthly recurring fee. And that's what we did. I can't say it worked as well as I thought it would, but that's what we did. And that's how we built Highrock.
Oh, that's so cool. So you were really on the front edge of that. And did you start with Xero or did you start with something
Yeah,
else?
I did.
Started with
So we were
Xero.
one of the first firms in the US utilizing Xero. They were predominantly in New Zealand and Australia when I started Highrock. So, we're talking 2013, beginning of 2014. And I was looking for what I could do to be able to travel, because that's another one of my passions is travel. And being tied to a desk is really not something I enjoy. So when I was working with companies on their accounting side and coming in as an outsourced CFO, and they had QuickBooks Desktop, and I had to go to their site once a week to get information and put information in, and it was not wonderful. So Xero solved that for me, and it was at the time much, much better than QuickBooks Online because they had been born in the cloud, right? Like you said. And so, that's really where we focused. And it's also how I got to be a national ambassador, because I was one of the first in the country utilizing it and rolling it out to all our clients.
Wow. Well, back up just a little bit. So your dad, you were grounded and your dad taught you accounting. Did he see that as a little bit of a punishment? Was that what that was?
He definitely had creative ways to dissuade me from getting in trouble, and forcing me to study college level material. He thought was a very clever way to, give me a consequence. I wouldn't say it was truly punishment, but a consequence for my behaviors and decisions.
Well, did he become better able to teach accounting after teaching you?
Oh, he was a great teacher. It was never a question of his teaching ability. It was a question of the students, and accounting topics are difficult. And I think that there were, even today when I'm interviewing like kids coming out of school and they're like, oh, my financial accounting, like I barely got a C, it was killing me, and they're typically just really difficult classes for students to do well. So, yeah.
So do you and your dad have conversations about why people don't go into accounting nowadays, since we've got such this talent shortage?
So he was a professor for about 20 years, and he retired recently, actually during the pandemic. And when he retired, he said a lot of the way kids are coming into the program and the way they're approaching careers and thinking about things has changed significantly. And so, I think there is definitely a shortage of people if you look at the numbers, but there's also a difference in the way people are approaching it as a career. And so, we've had a lot of conversations about how do we fix that and get these kids coming into school to truly understand what the job prospects are, because it is no longer, general ledger work. It's not the same as it was even 20 years ago. When I started in the career, it's different. And, understanding the systems and understanding that they'll have to utilize really interesting tech moving forward to be able to do their jobs changes the way people approach the profession in total.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed is, you're very entrepreneurial. I know that about you, just having multiple conversations with you. And our last conversation, and we'll get to this in a minute, was about the things that you're kind of investigating and that you're curious about in terms of like taking your career to another spot. And but what I was getting at is like you're entrepreneurial. A lot of the firms that are creating cloud firms or switching to cloud firms, and they're younger owners, they're really exciting businesses in a way that's very different than the way traditional accounting firms operated even a decade ago. I think it's a changing field. It's an exciting field. It's too bad that students can't see enough of that. I think they're seeing it, but maybe they're not seeing it a lot.
They're starting to, and there's more and more people like myself attempting to speak to them about that, right? And figuring out ways to get the message across that this is no longer a suit and tie. You have one career trajectory to partner in a traditional CPA firm with billable hours and a pyramid scheme. There's all sorts of other opportunities and different ways to make it.
Yeah.
And so, I think the more we can get people that are enthusiastic and excited and young and have a lot of energy speaking about these topics, the more people we will attract to the industry, and the faster we'll close that gap.
Yeah. And there's some fun. I mean, you work with a lot of Xero partners. So,
Mhm.
I mean, what are you seeing in the Xero community? You probably see a lot of cool business models and niches and
Yeah, we definitely do. So the thing that I've enjoyed the most with the Xero Ambassador side is getting to meet these partners that have niched down into these very intricately small, but also large genres of business, right? And so, there's people that, because if you think about the world, right, we have a global economy at this point, and if you are the firm for X, that borders don't matter as much anymore, right? And of course, there's different requirements in different countries about how bookkeeping is done or accounting is done and what documentation is required and different licenses that you have to have or don't have to have. But if you can figure that piece of it out, then you can really work with anyone around the world. And so, it's fun to hear about the stories of people working with, this one specific thing. Like, I met with a company where they only do accounting for car dealerships. That's it. I met with another company. They only do accounting for churches. Another one only does accounting for influencers that have at least 1 million in revenue a year. So big time influencers, right? So like when you start breaking down these industries and getting into the nitty gritty and the intricacies, it's fascinating to see like how
yeah.
they've built their tech stack to do one thing, right? And that's it. And they have no interest because there's enough work. You don't have to branch out. You don't have to be like the local shop. You can be the people that do this one thing the best.
Yeah. And it's a hard thing for a lot of people to wrap their head around because you think, well, gosh, if I'm limiting myself to just this one industry, or if I'm saying no to so many things, isn't that going to decrease my opportunity? And actually, no, it actually increases it. We had a client that we sold last year, and she had a lot of professional gamblers as clients, and she wrote a book
Mhm.
about gambling, and it was just really about poker. They were professional poker
Yeah,
players.
yeah, that's cool.
And so
Yeah.
yeah, you meet some really interesting CPAs out there.
Absolutely.
So
And they get to like dig into things. So my aunt is also an accountant. It runs in our blood if you haven't figured that part out yet.
yeah,
But she is an accountant that focuses solely on musicians. And
yeah,
so, I spent my childhood going backstage at all these major concerts, and I thought that it was normal to be able to meet the new musicians after the concert and,
yeah,
do things like that, which is really, really cool. But she's also, started focusing in on a niche in New York a long time ago before there were really the systems and processes to make it more efficient just to know one thing. It was more about that's the industry her contacts were in, and that's where she started and stayed.
Hey, Accountant's Flight Plan listener. Are you thinking about selling your practice or curious about how much your firm is worth? Having sold firms for over 20 years, we've seen 8 key factors that come into play when determining the value of a firm. Download our free Valuation Key Factors report to assess your firm's value today. You can find it by searching Poe Group Advisors Valuation Report or visiting PoeGroupAdvisors.com. Thanks for listening, and now back to the episode.
what does a Xero ambassador? What are your responsibilities or duties as an ambassador?
Yeah, so I sometimes I think they asked me to be a Xero ambassador because I am loud and opinionated and capable of speaking and also not scared to share my opinions, which is a wonderful thing that Xero actually supports that, right? And the couple things I get to do is I get to work with their sales team, help them understand the voice of the customer really, and see, what are partners concerned about, what are we interested in, what can they do to help their partners be more successful. I help them with like the community building in different areas, bringing people together with events and strategy around that. I do a lot of speaking at conferences. And the thing I really love about the way Xero approaches conferences is it's not a sales pitch for Xero. If they pay for a speaking slot, it is how do we bring the most value and content to the audience here? And then, of course, their branding ends up all over the place, which is the result that they're paying for. But really, they're focused on bringing value and delivering value to potential partners as well as current Xero partners. And then writing, I do a lot of writing on their behalf and help them with that kind of content strategy and what should they be focusing on and thinking about and what do we care about as accountants. And then sometimes they also get to advise on product. So when they're building the product, they send it to us first to beta test. I'm talking to their product people, working with them on the roadmap and the strategy and the things that should be prioritized for accountants to have a better experience.
Oh, wow. It's pretty big role then. I mean, you're kind of doing,
Yeah. It's it doesn't feel like it because it's fun and interesting and things that I'm happy to look at and work on. And also at the end of the day, it benefits me as an accounting firm owner. So
yeah. Well, so last time we talked, you had this idea that you were shared with me about like I felt like you were brainstorming like, what, I kind of got Highrock running itself a little bit. Like I'm not, it's not an owner dependent practice at this point.
Mhm.
And so you're free to sort of explore and sort of think about new ideas, which is an awesome
That's
place to be in.
dangerous.
It's dangerous, but it's a great, wonderful
With me,
spot.
it's dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. But one idea was like doing some real estate specialization and
Mhm.
yeah, what are you
Yeah.
kind of like, what are you thinking? Where do you think the road's leading for you next?
So we
Or what
talked
do
a
you,
little bit about,
yeah.
no, great question. We talked a little bit about niches and practices being able to double down and specialize. And so one of the things we've done at Highrock is build industry teams. So we have teams specialized in XYZ, right? So one of our biggest industry teams is cannabis. And that was the last time my business partner and I got bored and decided, oh, hey, we're going to start a sister brand called Rebel Rock and only service cannabis and psilocybin and emerging natural medicine markets. And so that's where we focused that whole practice. And it's been really interesting and fun and fascinating. Our first industry was tech startups and SaaS companies, particularly. And then we branched into biotech companies and some healthcare tech as well. And that's also been really fascinating and interesting. Those teams are, running, doing fantastic things. And we have a team in nonprofits. We have an e-com team, right? So we have a few other niches that we're very highly specialized in. And I promised the team that I would not start any new businesses, but I didn't say I wouldn't start any new service lines. And so what I've been thinking about is how do I build a service line that I'm super passionate about that I haven't already figured out? Like I'm super passionate about technology and SaaS companies. Absolutely. But I figured it out. I learned it. I passed it down. We have advisors, CFO advisors. They're all doing their thing, doing great things with our clients. I'm not really needed in that role anymore. So I was thinking about international real estate because, there's a few reasons, right? We have a rising global economy where people are placing their money in different assets in different places, trying to diversify. We have more remote work that's enabling people to go work from another country for a few years, right? We have a lot of people with US-based real estate assets that want to liquidate and move to another country for a couple of years, potentially have an Airbnb in another country, have a vacation house in different places, and they don't know how to do it. Like they don't know how to structure it for US tax. They don't know how to structure it for international tax. They don't know how to structure it for estate planning purposes, or if they want to actually run an Airbnb or something of that sort, some kind of rental company. What does that look like? What are the tax implications? How do you even move the money? Who do you talk to in these other countries about this, right? And so I'm thinking if I build that network and I get, because, it's not that hard for us as accountants to call CPAs, and even in other countries, even with some language translation issues, I believe we can vet them much easier than someone on the street, right? Because we can say, oh, like, I know what I'm talking about. Let's talk about the industry stuff. Do you know what you're talking about? Ask the key questions. And then, we can come back to our clients being the, generally speaking, wealthy individuals or business owners that want to branch out and buy real estate and say, okay, so here's your realtor. Here's how we're structuring it. Here's your CPA. We're going to manage the whole process. You just have to talk to our team. And then we build a service line just based on that. So that's kind of my latest. This sounds also, the real genius of this is I get to travel internationally because I'm going to have to meet these people in person, right?
Yes.
So clients are going to have to pay for me to go to wherever they want to buy a house.
Yeah. I remember because I had just gotten back from vacation in San Pedro, Belize when we had this conversation. And I thought, it's needed. I could see it. There's so much development going on. There's so many international investors buying property there. And The side effect I see is you becoming a real estate investor out of all this, because you'd have so
That's
much
a
inside
terrible side
information.
effect.
Yeah, yeah.
What a consequence.
What a consequence. Better watch out for that, right? Might
Oh,
collect some real
absolutely.
estate.
That sounds terrible. I don't know what I'll do when I have beautiful homes all over the world. Just cry myself to sleep.
Yeah. What else are you curious about or thinking about? Anything that
Yeah, I mean,
reaches that
so
level?
we are hitting a point in kind of in like the CAS, right? So in client accounting advisory services, however you want to define that CAS service line, that's, what we do, right? We do it all in the cloud. We work with clients, mostly CFO controller level advisory engagements. And then we do all the bookkeeping below that. And we have a wonderful team in India that's helping us with that. And we are constantly utilizing new technologies to make it more efficient and automated. And it's great. And it's also stabilizing. So when we started, we were kind of at the very edge and like first adopter wave, if you're looking at like a bell curve. And we're not there anymore because now major firms, most firms have a CAS group. People are thinking about cloud accounting. They're utilizing these tools more effectively and efficiently. More tools are getting created daily, right? And I do think there'll be some more innovation on the generative AI side. However, our industry, where we sit in the accounting industry, is leveling out and becoming mature. And that to me is a little boring. So I think from a Highrock perspective, if we're going to maintain that innovation and maintain thinking about this industry and what we can do and push the limits with, we're going to have to not only play with all these AI tools, but also build these types of niche service lines that other people aren't really doing yet, and be thinking about like, what else can we focus on? And that's part of where, our cannabis practice came from, was most CPA firms weren't touching it when we started. And, now it's still only about half of them. And a lot of the big firms aren't and won't, because they just don't see the point in entering a risky industry, right? So what else can we do? I mean, there's all sorts of things we can do. And there's also ways to innovate the business model. And so building service lines is kind of number one, focusing on different parts of the world, I guess you could say, that aren't really being well serviced at the moment. And then the second piece of it is focusing on how do we keep our business model iterating and working towards the future. And, and that could be, and we're thinking about all these options, right? Like that could be, how do we create employee ownership that is not the traditional partner model? How do, like, looking at trusts, for example, as a vehicle for that, looking at other forms of business organization in general to increase the wealth that we're distributing to our team members. How do we change our incentive model to align with remote work? And this is a big one, because you're sitting at a point where you have so many large companies forcing people back into the office because they don't know how to manage and they don't know how to incentivize remote workers. And so you end up with a huge loss in productivity. And we've seen that as well, right? With our team being completely remote, it's hard for us to say like, yeah, they're working full time.
Maybe.
How do you tell that, right? Like, there is no good answer. So how do we incentivize them to put in the time and effort to increase productivity, so we align incentives to what people actually care about nowadays? And so that's one of the big things I'm working on from a business model shift. And then, I mean, I think that there's so many different pieces of the business you can play with. And you kind of have to get to the point where you have people that are running the day-to-day, handling most of the client work and interesting things on that front. And then you can start iterating on the actual business and on the model and the way that you're thinking about accounting or the industry or the services in total.
Hey y'all, Ian chiming in here again to let you know that we've announced the start dates for the 2024 sessions of Accounting Practice Academy. We're running it on May 24th, July 26th, and September 27th. APA, if you don't know, is an 8-week virtual workshop and an incredible resource for firm owners who need to get their hours down without affecting their bottom line. Most owners who take the workshop actually see a significant increase in profitability while reducing their hours. I know it sounds crazy, but dig into the workshop details on our website and check out some of our testimonials. So if you want to learn more, visit accountingpracticeacademy.com. Thanks for listening, and now back to the episode.
You kind of spark some ideas as I'm hearing you say all this. It's like, that's what I love about hanging out with you, is like the ideas just keep coming. And one thing, as you're talking about these things, like one thing I think that the industry, first of all, I think it's a good thing that the early adopters are no longer early adopters, that it's becoming mainstream, because I think the business clients and clients in general are benefiting from all that.
Absolutely.
But I think I think we can go way deeper with a lot of clients. I think that's, to me, that's not only deeper in a niche, but just deeper in the relationship, deeper as like
Absolutely.
more of a partner with these companies, maybe an actual partner with some of these companies. And, you know, I feel like so many accountants don't go deep, not nearly as deep as the client would want them to be. And
Right. And you'd be surprised about like negotiating those rates, because that's normally the biggest complaint, right? Is accountants say, well, I can't because they want me to do all this stuff, but they can't afford me to do all this stuff, right? And it's, who are you to make that judgment on their behalf, right? Give them the opportunity to have that conversation and say, hey, so what I'm hearing is you need advice on XYZ, right? You need to talk through these business decisions that you're making in a vacuum with no support and no advice. And also, you need to increase your profit margin to be able to pay for us to do that. So how do we figure out that across the board with you? And what does that look like? And provide the value.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because if we don't provide the value, someone else will. And EOS is an example of that. Like, they've done a great job at like creating a really highly consultative program and structure to help people run their businesses. And why can't accountants kind of fill that need? That there are people willing to pay it. It's a viable business model. Anyway, that's
absolutely. Well, and that's, I mean, I can tell you, and I think I looked at this yesterday, it was about 80% of all of our sales in 2024 have been upsells with clients.
Yeah.
And most of it is partnering deeper. It's saying, hey, we recognize you have this need. Let us handle it for you. We're totally equipped to do it. Here's our, monthly price that will increase to take care of it. And just being very direct with clients and saying, hey, here's an identified issue that is not being handled well, or you're not getting the advice you need on the CFO level, or, let's work with you on sales tax. Whatever it is, right? We can look at it and work through with our clients and say,
right.
This is an identified need. Let our team help.
Yeah. Well, so I want to ask you a couple of closing questions, and you've had some funny stories you've shared with me. I'd love for you to share some of those with our audience, like some funny career stories.
Yeah, I would be happy to. I think there are a lot of weird things that have happened to me in life and in my career. And some of that, I think, is just because I do a lot of things and I put myself potentially in situations that aren't necessarily the best idea. But I'll tell you, I think the funniest story and most bizarre experience I ever had in my life was with a prospect years ago. So we had a small office in Tempe, and it's very close to the university. And to be honest, not that many people walk into our office. It was mostly very much, like scheduled meetings with clients. They would come to our office, but at that point we were going to theirs more often than not. And we weren't fully remote at that point. So I was in the office all the time. And I did schedule a prospect meeting. And this guy came in with like a 3-piece suit, buttoned up, looked impeccable, like amazing presence, right? Comes in with a briefcase, which of course, like, I'm sitting here with my backpack and my jeans and polo. I'm like, oh, okay, well, like, whatever, kind of misread the situation, but it is what it is. And he started telling me about this idea he had to take the earnings that he had from a prior success, which of course I had no idea what that was, and build his own roll-up strategy. So he wanted to buy specific types of businesses across the country that were all the same business, streamline process, operations, streamline, staffing, understanding everything, and basically make it a big organization very quickly. And he said he had about $300 million to invest into the strategy and wanted help with everything from due diligence on the shops he was going to be buying to, actually being a CFO for this organization, to structuring each individual state issues, all of that. So there was a lot of work he needed help from an accounting firm. So huge opportunity for us, right? And so we're having these conversations, and I'm trying to figure out how to price this job, right? Because how do you even price that? There's so many different areas that need help, and it's not consistent every month. And so I'm coming up with, okay, so like a monthly fee to be the CFO, plus like, here's what due diligence is, here's when I need to bring someone else in, right? All of those things. And I'm putting together this pricing, and through that process and through, prospecting processes in general, you get to know the people you're going to be working with quite well. So we're texting quite a bit, emailing quite a bit, like really funny person, like very charismatic, very charming, like lots of really interesting stories and ideas and strategies and like really cool stuff. So I'm super excited, like he's super excited. We're working through this process. And unbeknownst to me, I had crossed a little bit of a personal business line, right? And so I didn't really think much of it. I'm like, oh, he's getting a little flirty, but whatever. Like, I'm just going to continue talking about business and not really pay attention to that, right? Like, not uncommon, but also like a little inappropriate, but that's okay. So start, continuing down the path of how do we service these entities. And then I start researching. So I'm like, okay, where did he get this money? Like anyone that just walks in off the street with $300 million has to have like a history, right? And also, why is he coming to us and not to like a big accounting firm, right? Like I started getting a little spidey tinglies, right? So I start researching, and I find out he gave me a fake name. I found his real name. He was indicted in California for basically embezzling money from nonprofits. And he served 7 years in prison and had been recently released. So they indicted him on, I think it was about 14 million of embezzlement. And I saw the bank statements, like he had $300 million in the bank accounts, and it was all offshore as well, which was another kind of question mark for me. So a lot of this was like repatriating money in tax efficient ways. And, I start thinking about it and asking questions. So I was like, hey, I think we need to have an in-person meeting to talk about this. And of course, I wasn't going to take a client knowing that he's a felon and this is stolen money, particularly from nonprofits. Like, not a good look, right? So I was pretty disappointed because I had gotten so excited. So I, invited him to the office to tell him in person, that we couldn't continue the conversation and that we wouldn't be accepting the work. And, of course, those are really difficult conversations, but I felt out of respect, I should at least have that in-person conversation. And so I told him, unfortunately, we're going to have to pass. Really appreciate it. We wish you the best of luck. And he asked directly why. And of course, I said, capacity issues. We're a really small firm. Like, as I dig into this, we just don't have enough people to support this work. Like, you need to go to a major firm and work with a team that has, the capacity to jump in as you're growing and scaling. And he paused and looked at me and was like, is there anything else? And, I, of course, didn't know what to say. So I'm sitting there tongue-tied, which is not usual for me, right? And how do you tell somebody, hey, well, I figured out that you gave me an alias and I know you're a criminal, and also you're inappropriately flirting with me, and how do you say all of that in a way that's not going to trigger something more than, somebody just gracefully walking away, right? So I'm sitting there, and he was like, when did you figure it out? That's what he asked me.
Wow. And
I was like, about a week ago. And he was like, okay, that's pretty quick. I'm like, all right. And he stopped and he paused and he's like, I really like you. I think you're brilliant. I need somebody like you on my team. He's like, but more than that, I need someone like you in my life. And I was like, okay, I appreciate that. That's really nice. Thank you for the compliments. And also I have a professional license to uphold, and I can't, engage in money laundering effectively. And he legitimately in the meeting got down on one knee with a diamond ring and proposed to me. And I was like, clearly no, like this is inappropriate. Like I appreciate the sentiment here. And also like, please leave, right? He, said, okay, I understand. Like that's really disappointing. And then he
Wow.
handed me an envelope and said, if you change your mind, cash that check, and walked out of the office. And I was like,
Wow. Crazy.
okay, like what the, okay, right. So like walks out of the office and I'm like, this is like, I was terrified. And I'm a giant nerd, right? So like, this is not a thing that happens to me regularly. Right. And so I'm like my heart's racing. I'm like, oh my God, like, do I need to lock the door? Like, and clearly like he was very polite, very like above board, walks out of the office. I walk out of the conference room and I sit at my desk and I'm still like freaking out. And I open the envelope and it was a check for $1 million.
Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
Right?
That's one of the craziest stories I've ever heard from an accountant. Like
Yeah,
that's
it was
bizarre.
it was very weird.
So do you know what
Very
happened to
weird.
him? Did you
I
know?
don't know.
No?
Nope. I cut off all communication. I actually changed my phone number because he did
Yeah.
not stop texting me for a while. And we moved our office.
Wow. It'd be
Yeah,
interesting to
so
Google him and see what happened to him.
yeah, right. I mean, I'm sure he found somebody to launder money or repatriate, money into the US that was clearly stolen, and buy businesses and put it into legitimate ways. Like I'm sure he found somebody to help him with this criminal
Wow.
enterprise, but
Crazy.
it was not going to be me.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
But I did learn a big lesson that day. I cannot be bought.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Know thyself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. You never quite know until your feet are in the fire.
Yeah. Wow. What a great story. What a strange story.
So
Thanks
weird.
for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very bizarre.
So my last question, I always like to get our listeners, our guests to recommend a book that people might benefit from. Do you have a good book recommendation?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question because there's, the books I read for business and there's the books I read for like my own personal sanity because I love reading. And so a book that I read frequently is Traction. I agree with a lot of it. I don't agree with a lot of it. And also every time I read it, I learn something else. And so I probably read that every other year, to be honest, and implement different pieces of it with the team. And I've modified EOS in a way that works really well for us. And, but I do think it's all about, the right kinds of communication and understanding the core issues. And that to me is really helpful to frame how to approach business management, really.
Yeah.
So I like that book. Anything by Brené Brown, I will read over and over again. And I would encourage everyone to do that because being more in touch and understanding like the psychology of, humans and business and the interrelationship of it is very important to being a good leader.
Yeah. Well, I've got a book suggestion for you because of the story that you just told. So,
Oh, no.
And this is a beach read. Okay. And my wife read it. My wife read it and she said, this is a really good book. It's called First Lie Wins. I don't know who the author is offhand, but I actually read that book while I was on vacation and I couldn't put it down. So
that's awesome.
But it was kind of like it was like it was about a bunch of criminals. And so based on the story that you just had, you might find it rather amusing.
Yeah, I try to avoid the criminal world in my professional life. I mean, personal life too, to be fair, but just in general, I avoid that as much as possible. But I for fun reads, I tend to read really bad sci-fi and fantasy books. So that's what gets me completely in a different world, like literally in my brain, which I think is where a lot of good ideas come from when you can distract yourself.
Well, Liz, thanks for coming on. This has been awesome.
Thank you for having me.
So what's the best way for people to follow you online?
Yeah, follow me on Twitter at Lizzie Norma. That's probably the easiest and fastest way to find me. And from there, I'm sure you can find everything else.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Accountant's Flight Plan podcast. If you like what you heard today, please follow us so that you can get updates when new episodes are released, and share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. You can also follow Poe Group Advisors on social media. Please visit our website for more information at pogroupadvisors.com.